The woman who became our Foreign Secretary just 12 weeks ago is the daughter of an anti-nuclear campaigner who took her on protests against the sighting of American missiles in Britain. And, as Liz Truss told me the last time she appeared on Political Thinking, she also used to chant on the streets of Scotland, Maggie, oot, oot, oot. This week, she gave an important speech in which she criticised those in what she called fashionable circles for being ashamed of our past and too doubtful about the future. It's a sort of plain speaking that makes her a favourite amongst Tory activists and led some newspapers to dub her the new Mrs T. Liz Truss, welcome back to Political Thinking.
Great to be here, Nick.
Do you remember what you said to me about diplomacy last time we sat in this studio?
I've completely forgotten, Nick.
I don't think anyone describes me as a diplomat, Nick. I'm not very diplomatic. So how does it feel now being the country's top diplomat?
Well, I think it depends on the way you interpret the word diplomacy. I think what I was getting at, Nick, is I'm somebody who likes to speak my mind. I'm clear about what I think, and I'm not going to trim my messages for the audience. But I think that quality can be useful in foreign policy when we face at the moment a situation with a very aggressive Russia, when we face challenges for the free world in terms of our fundamental beliefs in things like freedom and democracy. So maybe now is not the time for a diplomat.
Old-fashioned ideas of diplomacy, you mean? Schmoozing, telling people what they want to hear, perhaps. Constructive ambiguity, they've all gone, have they?
Well, I fully approve of the schmoozing part because you do have to get to know your colleagues. You have to, modern diplomacy is now as much about WhatsApp as it is about ambassadors' parties. But those are all part of building a relationship and building trust. So even with some of the most difficult interlocutors, you're able to communicate directly. That's very, very important. And that's core, absolutely core to the job.
We will come to parties later. Tell me how it felt, though, because you weren't expecting to be Foreign Secretary when I spoke to you, 3 years ago. You stride up that amazing staircase in that extraordinary building just off Whitehall. You've got, an office the size of a tennis court overlooking St James's Park. How did it feel?
I was delighted, but you have to take a few seconds to process your new role. Because I've been Trade Secretary, I've spent quite a lot of time travelling, meeting overseas governments. So I know a lot of what the role involves. But of course, it's a major step, and it's a hugely impressive government department. We've got one of the best diplomatic networks in the world. As you say, the Foreign Office itself is fine, but our assets are really overseas in terms of what we're able to achieve.
When Robin Cook got the job, he sat in that chair in the office you now occupy and said, how did a boy from the Workers' Education Association end up here? I wonder if there was a bit of you who thought, how did a girl who went to Greenham Common to protest against American nuclear weapons, how did she end up here in the Foreign Office?
The time that occurred to me was when I was at COP in Glasgow. And I was thinking only 8 miles away, the young Liz Truss was at primary school in Paisley. And she would never have imagined that she was at COP as Foreign Secretary in Glasgow. So that's the time it really hit home.
Do you still remember how to make your Blue Peter style nuclear missile, which I think you made out of loo rolls and cereal?
No, it was carpet rolls, Nick. So it was much bigger than that. It was sort of about 10 foot long. The problem was that my mother had covered it with flowered wallpaper, so it perhaps didn't have the psychological effect that a real nuclear weapon would have had.
I imagine that she is pretty much a straight talker, like Liz Truss is a straight talker. So did she say, well, now you're Foreign Secretary, you better get rid of these nuclear weapons? Did you have a few words of advice for
I
me?
think she knows my views. We've had many conversations about this in the past, and I respect the fact she's got different views from me, and she respects the fact I have different views.
last
And that's the great thing about living in a free society with free-minded parents.
Free-minded parents is a very good description. One thing I didn't know then, which I've learned since, is not only were you on anti-nuclear campaigns, not only were you chanting Maggie out, 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 or oot, 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 as you put it, you were a Republican. You were against Her Majesty the Queen.
I think it's fair to say that when I was in my youth, I was a professional controversialist, and I liked exploring ideas and stirring things up.
You said, "We believe in opportunity for all. We do not believe in people who are born to rule."
As I say, I think I was in my teens at the time, Nick, when I made that statement. And I came from a left-wing background. As I said, my mother was in the campaign for nuclear disarmament. There were very few people at my school or who I met on a regular basis. In fact, I could count them on one hand who you describe as right-wing. But I think over time, I began to understand more about why Britain is successful. And part of our success is the constitutional monarchy that supports a free democracy. So over time,
you've not had to explain that to Her Majesty, though.
Her Majesty has never asked me about that.
Now, you've explained why you went on this journey from the views that you were brought up with to the views that you've got now. One of the things you told me last time we spoke is you didn't like being told what to do. There's that kind of...
That's still true.
Still true. I'm intrigued, though, where that stems from. Who in your youth was telling you what to do?
Well, I think certainly when I was at school, I got frustrated by, the lip service that was paid to causes with that, and a sort of lack of telling the truth about the reality. So it wasn't acceptable to question that. There was a sort of soft bigotry of low expectations, a general attitude that...
What, right-thinking people think this way?
Exactly.
It's interesting, you gave a big speech this week, first since you became Foreign Secretary, which is, after all, only, 12 weeks ago. And you used the phrase fashionable circles. You said people talked in fashionable circles about how we should be ashamed of our history and doubtful about our future. Were you thinking back to those school teachers?
Yeah, so when I had school teachers who would regularly sort of have a go at Margaret Thatcher over the miners' strike, or, we had, whole lessons on sexism and racism rather than talking about, as I say, the core skills that would have helped children get on. I'm not saying we didn't do English and maths. I'm just saying there was a disproportionate focus on some of those issues. And I found it really, really frustrating.
What's the equivalent now, then? If that's what offended you then, you're giving a speech now about people being ashamed of our history. What are you thinking of now?
Well, what I'm thinking about now is the movements to pull down statues, the attack on Winston Churchill's statue, the sort of focus on all of the negative elements of Britain's history. Now, I'm not saying Britain's perfect, but there are very few countries with an unblemished past. And I think we should focus on what is good about our country today. And
yet, Prince Charles was, as you know, at the declaration of Barbados's independence. What did he do? He talked about, quotes, the appalling atrocity of slavery. He called Britain's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade the darkest days of our past. Was he wrong to do that?
No, he wasn't wrong to do that. And the
that's being ashamed of our past, isn't it? Or
the transatlantic slave trade was completely abhorrent. Of course, he wasn't wrong to do that. But my point is, we are in a world where we face increasingly aggressive authoritarian regimes. We see on the border of Ukraine, Russian forces lined up. We're seeing China flex its economic muscles not just across Southeast Asia, but across the world. And yes, of course, we need to talk about our past, but I want us to spend more time talking about where we are now, the fact that we are a free country, that we are a democracy, we believe in individual liberty, we give opportunities to everybody in our society. It doesn't matter if you're black or LGBT or a woman, you have opportunities here in Britain. What I'm saying is the introspection, excessive introspection, does give succor to our adversaries.
I understand the point. The question I want to ask you is whether people having a debate about whether this or that statue should stand in a museum still, whether even throwing that statue of Colston into the water, you're not seriously saying that undermines our fight against communism and against President Putin, or are you?
And I believe in free speech and the right to protest, and people are perfectly entitled to do and say, provided it's within the law, what they want in Britain. And that's the nature of our free society. But what I'm saying to the people of Britain, what I'm saying to the Foreign Office, what I'm saying to the media is let's raise our sights a bit. Let's look at what's going on around the world. Let's fight for these values we believe in.
Let's talk about those then. There's a fight of ideas, as you say, between democracies, free countries, and the rest of the world, particularly China and Russia, as you put it. How much do you fear that on your watch, that in a relatively short period of time, there may be real fights, actual fights, starting with, for example, the warnings we've heard all week about the build-up of forces on Ukraine's border from Russia? Do you really fear, and you recently met the Russian foreign minister, do you really fear a hot war, not just a war of words?
Well, I'm a great believer in deterrence, Nick. And what I want to do is work with our friends and allies to avoid that. And the way we avoid that is from a position of strength. So that's reducing economic dependence on those regimes, including gas from Russia. It's about reducing technological dependence. We've removed Huawei now from our 5G network. But it's also about making sure that we have the security deterrence in place. That's why I visited our troops on the Estonian border, where NATO forces led by the United Kingdom are supporting our Baltic friends.
Was it a conscious decision to make yourself look like Margaret Thatcher in that tank? Her image in Germany in the 1980s, yours in a tank with people in Russia calling you the new Iron Lady, here the new Mrs. T. Was it a conscious decision to channel, if you like, her assertiveness?
It was a conscious decision to go to Estonia to show our support for the Baltic states when they are under serious pressure from Russia. And at a time when we're seeing escalating Russian forces on the Ukrainian
Are you
border.
flattered by the comparison?
Well, I would point out, Nick, that it was minus 10 degrees when I was in the tank. So I think it was a different scenario. Lots of politicians do visit tanks. And
You're saying it was not in your mind as you sat in that tank is possibly the most famous image of Margaret Thatcher, other than one cuddling a calf, and the Daily Mail managed to find a photograph of you also cuddling a calf.
Well, as you know, Nick, I'm a former agriculture secretary, so I'm very fond of farmers. And
they
farming.
also found a photograph of you on top of a Triumph motorbike. Mrs. Thatcher was photographed on top of a Triumph motorbike. Are these all coincidences?
I think they are, Nick. Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Lots of people think you might be the next Mrs. Thatcher. Indeed, in Tory activist polls, you are, as you know, top of their choice to replace the Prime Minister, who for now is secure. Let's see. I'm interested too in this speech, this phrase "network of liberty." It's the name of your daughter, isn't it?
It is.
Is that
She's very
why-
pleased about that.
Is that why you chose the name?
I do like the
important.
concept of liberty, and it's I think it's a nice name.
But freedom, that's how you define yourself.
I think that's my number one abiding belief, is the freedom for people to have agency and control over their own lives and to be able to decide their own destiny. That's very important for me personally, but it's also important, I think, to achieve a successful life and successful societies. And I think successful societies are based on giving people power over their own lives.
Yeah, and many people in the Conservative Party would agree with that, and they'd say that's what Brexit did, and then they'd just have to remind themselves that you described Brexit as a leap in the dark. You called on people to go out and vote. If you care about being an outward-facing, internationally focused country, go out and vote Remain. Were you wrong? Or have you simply seen the error of your ways over time, or are you simply living with the decision of the British people and saying, well, let's make the best of it?
In retrospect, I would have voted for Brexit because I think it has given us huge freedom and flexibility as a country we didn't have before. And in particular on foreign policy, we now have the ability to coordinate our development policy, our trade policy, our defence policy and our diplomacy together. And we can and are having a huge impact. So yes, I have changed my mind.
Should people trust a convert? I mean, you've changed your mind not once but twice on things that people would regard as fundamental values. And there are some people who don't trust people who change their mind, think, well, God, if she was wrong then, maybe she's wrong now.
Well, the way I see it is that I have, from being a child in a sort of left-wing family, I've thought about things from first principles. So I base my beliefs on the idea that successful societies give people freedom. And when people, it's a great Margaret Thatcher quote, when people are free to choose, they choose freedom. And, over time, I have thought more about how you best create a free society, what are the institutions that achieve that. And there was a debate about whether or not, Mrs. Thatcher famously supported joining the European Union and thought that would be a good way of helping achieve her aims. Towards, the end of her tenure, she became more sceptical. So I think over time, you have to look at what are the policies, what are the institutional structures you think will achieve those goals.
Let's turn to what's not been the easiest of weeks for the government, to put it mildly. Did you have a departmental Christmas party last year?
No.
Can you help us with a definition of what a party is? There seems some confusion.
No, I can't, Nick.
You wouldn't like me to help you whether cheese is a party or wine is a party or...
No, I can't help you with that, Nick.
But you're being very taciturn for a straight talker. Seriously, as a straight talker, what's the way out of this crisis in which has clearly done great damage?
The Cabinet Secretary is, I'm sure, investigating all these questions that you've just asked, Nick. So we will see the results of that in due course. But last Christmas, I was spending my time getting trade deals over the line. We had a lot of deals to get done by the 31st of December, so that was my focus.
You didn't feel all your workers needed a party, let down their hair, have some fun?
No, we were busy working on the trade deals.
Getting on with the job. Wouldn't a plain speaker say, of course, it's obvious there was a party, everybody can see there was a party, let's just say it, move on, accept apologies if they're needed, get on with the job. Isn't that the right thing to do?
I don't know what went on. I really don't know, Nick.
On another serious matter, we're moving into new restrictions again. Less than they were a year ago. As a liberty lover, does it worry you? Have you needed some convincing that this is the right thing to do?
Look, I don't like restrictions on people's lives, but I do recognise that we are facing a very serious issue. There is this new variant. We don't quite know exactly how the future is going to unfold. So it is right to exercise caution and to bring in these measures, which, as you say, Nick, are not as onerous as some of the measures we've had in the past. So it seems to me a reasonable balance. I'm more focused on immediate foreign policy issues, of which there are quite a few. You know, the Iranian negotiations started again today. We have the issues with Russia and Ukraine. The Balkans as well is an issue of great concern. So there's quite a lot on my plate, Nick.
There is an awful lot on your plate. What do you say to those who say that in the modern era, and they're not making a comment about you, this is something that might have been true for years, if not decades, it's actually number 10. It's actually the Prime Minister that makes foreign policy. It is really about relationships between global leaders, not between people called Foreign Minister or Foreign Secretary.
I disagree with that. Of course, the Prime Minister, as a former Foreign Secretary, is very involved in foreign policy. And we talk a lot about our various foreign policy priorities, but ultimately there is a lot of work to be done in making things happen.
He's a busy man just now.
He is
we are
busy.
talking on Thursday morning when we've just heard that he is a father for a second time with Carrie, his wife. He's got a lot on, hasn't he? COVID, dealing with party rows, babies.
Well, huge congratulations to Boris and Carrie this morning. It's very exciting news. Very good news.
It is good news. Has he got too much on, though?
I don't think he does have too much on, and I think he's very capable at dealing with all the different issues that are happening. But this has been an extraordinary time in politics. We've had Brexit, which he successfully delivered, COVID, where the UK was really on the front, the front of the vaccine development.
But the serious question is, as a fellow parent, it's a heck of a lot the Prime Minister's got to juggle now, isn't it? 2 young babies in a flat in Downing Street, the COVID crisis, a political crisis. I think everybody would agree this is a political crisis he faces at the moment.
We've got working parents across Britain, who day in, day out go and do jobs, sometimes work 2 jobs. So they're capable of it. The Prime Minister's capable of it. And I really welcome the fact that we now have fathers a lot more involved in bringing up their children.
Is it important to you or irrelevant that you are the first working mother to be Foreign Secretary?
That's actually the first time that's occurred to me, Nick. So I've been too busy getting on with the job, as well as making sure my children are doing the right thing to be focused on that. But I am pleased that's the case.
You talk quite passionately at times about what's needed to allow women to work, to rise to the very top. Something you care about.
Absolutely. And, there is more, and I know Nadim Zahawi is doing this, there's more we need to do on making sure childcare is affordable. There's more we need to do in making sure workplaces are supportive of families.
I asked the question for this reason, and I hesitate as a man, and a man
Maybe
whose children
you should just not
have left
ask
home.
this question.
No. How difficult is it to do a job that complex whilst being the mother of teenage girls?
Well, my children were quite young when I was first elected, my 2 daughters, so they don't know any different, I'm afraid, apart from doing things like canvassing, attending Conservative Party events, talking about politics a lot. I think they're now very clued up on foreign policy, a bit more clued up than they'd like to be. But I enjoy it. I enjoy having a family and working in politics, and I think they should be combinable, and they are combinable.
Your mum got you to make a trident missile out of carpet roll. Have you got your daughters to create a banner or a model or a...
Well, my elder daughter is currently studying the Cold War. So we have quite a lot of discussions about, what the situation is like now and what it was like in the sort of 60s, 70s and 80s. So
Do you ever debate about whether mum or grandma was right?
Well, my daughter's very loyal. So she probably tells me I'm right, and she probably tells my mother she's right when I'm not there, I imagine.
And do you think she'll reject your views in the way that you rejected your mother's?
I don't reject all my mother's views, by the way. My mother does have some very good views on education, so I don't reject I don't reject all of my mother's views. But I hope I want my children to think for themselves. I am happy that they are that they are interested, they're engaged, they want to talk about these ideas, and I am very, very relaxed about them taking an alternative point of view from me.
If they want to call in, we'll leave my number at the end of the programme. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary. Thanks for joining me on Political Thinking. Well, what a difference 3 years can make. Not only has Liz Truss gone from being a junior cabinet minister to a leading candidate to replace Boris Johnson, but she's gone from a woman happy to joke about her past, happy to tell anecdotes, to one who looked rather nervous to recall them and wanted to present herself as the serious Foreign Secretary and, who knows, perhaps the serious candidate to replace Boris Johnson at number 10. That's it from this edition of Political Thinking. Thanks for watching.